Hey, y'all. Welcome back to the show. I'm so excited because I have a really special guest. I have Robert CEO Hockley with me today, and we're going to be talking about his time in prison, his life after prison, and just kind of expose some of the things that are going on in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. Robert, welcome.
Oh, thank you. Shout out to your audience. Shout out to you for having me.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I saw a TikTok video and you were talking about your time and anytime I see something where somebody's been incarcerated and they're doing something better with their life, I'm like tuning in. And then you said Texas, and that was the sweet spot for me because I'm a Texas girl. I did time in Texas, and I always want to hear what's going on in the Texas prisons and especially what guys have been through. Obviously, I don't have any experience on the men's side of things, but I don't have a whole lot of men on my show. So I know that my community here is going to be really anxious to hear about your time and all of that. So yeah, thank you for all of that. So Robert, you did about 8 years in TDCJ. What
DC.
years were you locked up?
I was locked up from 1995 to 2003, from the age of 17 to the age of 25.
What was your sentence that you did? I mean, you don't have to talk about your charge. I don't care about that. But what were you sentenced to at the age of
Oh,
17?
yeah, that's no problem. I was sentenced to an aggravated robbery, a home invasion.
How many years were you sentenced to?
I was sentenced to 8 years exactly.
Oh, you did your whole time. At 17 years old, you were sentenced. Had you ever been in trouble with the law before you did that time?
I had prior juvenile charges. So up until this point, I caught this charge on September 19th, 1995. I turned 17 August 5th of 1995. So 1 month after being a legal adult in Texas judicial system, I was charged with aggravated robbery and sentenced to 8 years in prison. 1 month after turning 17.
You walked into an adult prison as a 17-year-old kid, frankly.
Definitely, definitely.
I'm always fascinated. First of all, our juvenile justice system is, if you think Texas prisons are bad, the stories that we get out of our youth prisons are just far worse. They're not anything about helping these kids get on the right path. They're not anything about helping them deal with their mental health struggles, their anger struggles. Yeah, I feel honestly right now, I just feel like our community failed you as a youth that
No,
you
not
would.
now. Listen, as a youth, I got in trouble, and all youth, all the Texas Youth Commission did, right? TYC back then was the Texas Youth Commission. All it did was prepare you for prison, right? And what I didn't know because I was so young as I was growing up that Ann Richardson, we had a governor, Ann Richardson, right? And she was really about reform and helping people and giving people a chance. It wasn't until 1993 when George Bush came into office, right? That the laws changed and you could be in a Texas prison at 14 years old.
I can't imagine a decision that a 14-year-old could make. Their brains are not even close to being finished developing that would land them in prison like that. That's a really scary thought that Texas
I
is
mean,
locking their
so
youth
what
away.
what I mean, what they did was, excuse me, they created the law where you could be sent to prison at 14 years old here in the state of Texas. And I was one of the first offenders in 95, right? That was a juvenile, or let's say because I was 17, legally I was adult here in the state. But what they did was they decided, okay, this is before they created the G4 or G5 systems that they have now. These things were not in place when these things were enacted. They actually didn't come into place until probably 10 or 12 years after seeing this experiment play out, that they put these provisions in, right? So I was there when it started, and this was their solution. Their solution was saying, okay, we got a bunch of kids that we are putting in prison amongst hardened criminals, rapists, people that grown men that have life sentences. My cellie had a life sentence. I had 8 years, and my cellie was 6 years older than me, right? So these were the kind of conditions that we was coming into. And what they decided was, they say, well, since we starting this program, and it's called the Youth Offender Program, right? We're gonna put all the younger people on a prison by themselves to introduce them to prison, so it's less likely for them to get took advantage of. We're gonna put them on Clemens Unit in Brazilia from the age of 14 all the way to the age of 21. We're gonna put them together. And Marci, what this created was like a I don't know how to explain it, but it created like a melting pot of egos and anger and frustration. And someone that I know personally that I was that's from my community here of Galveston, Texas, that I went to school with, he was murdered when I was over there. June 3rd, 1996. Roderick Campbell was murdered in these conditions. He had an 8-year sentence. He had a 2-year sentence. He had 8 months on a 2-year sentence, and he was murdered at the age of 17. And this is someone I went to school with, grade school with, right? And we came into prison. He had 2 years, I had 8 years, and he was murdered 8 months into that sentence. So that alone changed my thought process. And that's kind of why, as you asked me about how much time I had versus how much time I did, after seeing someone murdered, right, I knew that, this was going to be a long ride, and I had to ride it all the way out, So that's what they had for us back in that time, was to just put us all on one unit as kids with no instructions, like you say, mental health issues, grade, everything you could think of, all the way up until the point that someone that I knew personally with lesser time than I had was murdered and killed in a ride on Clemens.
There are people listening to your story right now, watching you right now, that are thinking, hey, if a 17-year-old goes to prison for 8 years, good, because they're getting the help that they need. There are people that believe that our system is one that helps people, that helps keep the communities safer. So what would you say to those folks, based on your experience going in as a young man? Did the system help you rehabilitate any? And if so, what programs were available?
I get that question asked often based on the result that I have now in my life as a 45-year-old man and a business owner, a husband, and a father of 3 kids, right? I get asked that question a lot. But to be honest with you, Marci, and to be honest with the audience, I understand that I committed a crime. I understand that there should be harsh punishment. I understand that I should be removed from society. But at that mistake, at that pivotal time, and at that mistake, this is the best time to reform a child or a person, taking him out of the environment that he was in and teach him how to be a decent citizen, right? Teach him a skill set. I had no skill set other than being around drugs, guns, and violence. Teach me how to do carpentry. Teach me different things like this where you can instill and I can grow into a man. But prison wasn't that, Marci. Prison was designed to destroy the moral fabric of a person. It took me from one environment to a worse environment. It took me from the streets to hell, right? And it had no intentions on reforming me, only destroying me, only to keep the cycle of violence and ignorance prevalent in my community and in my society, so it could refill a bump, right? The system is structured like that. So I understand someone that does not commit mistakes or crimes, because, we have a different thought process when we're younger. We are thinking we could get away with this, right? And we are shown that we can't get away from this, but these systems are designed to make us predators. It's not designed to reform us.
Robert, that was definitely my experience as well. And I feel like we were some of the select few that were able to have a really successful life after prison. And it was not because of what the state of Texas did for us. It-
Correct.
so
Correct.
you touched a little bit on what the system, what it's for, what it's about. You talked about filling a bed, and it's definitely, our prison system is big money. And even though in Texas there aren't that many private prisons, I think people don't understand that state prisons are big business.
Big business for the state. I mean, it affects a big bottom line of this state, and it always have, and it seemed like it always will. I mean, you know more of the history than me, but in the 80s, it was a few prisons. And then it exploded. Once they realized this was a business, it exploded to over 110 prisons, right? And these prisons have to be filled. Now, yes, they do prey on minority communities, right? But if you find yourself on the other side of the law, right, as a Caucasian person, you will see it's not that fair. You will see real quick, just in your case. Yes, me and you had a discussion offline. You say, "Hey, Robert, I went to prison for stealing over $200,000 in money. We talking about money that they burned, right? And you got 22 years." I was like, wow, you did what? And they gave you 22 years for that. So where now you are still on parole. I mean, that's just crazy, man. We talking about freedom. Yeah, so it's just crazy. This system is not designed to reform us or help us. It is preying on us to fill beds and to meet bottom lines.
Absolutely. I talk a lot on my platforms about prisons don't make communities safer. We're the nation with the highest incarcerated population per capita, and yet our crime rates are still very high. Our recidivism rate is very high. We lead the whole world in our recidivism rate. That's proof right there that our prison system is failing our communities, but it is big business. It is making money. So that's what we talk about. You talked about the difference between the 80s and now. Well, it's a 500% increase in the past 40 years in our incarcerated population. So that's what's going on. I found you, the first video I saw of yours, you were doing an interview and you were talking about field squad work. You were talking about
Right.
picking cotton, plantation work when you were incarcerated. And I touch on this a lot. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery, but it didn't really abolish it. It just switched the game up a little bit, and it made slavery legal if you committed a crime. So that goes way back, right? That goes when
Right.
slavery is abolished, and then all of a sudden they need these workers, and they start what's called a convict leasing program,
Correct.
and they write all of these laws that make it nearly impossible for anybody that had been newly freed. I mean, like vagrancy laws. It was illegal not to have a job, but how do you get a job when you've just been released from slavery,
Right.
where you were probably prevented to even learn how to read? Frankly, if you learned how to read, you were doing it undercover most of the time. So it was just ridiculous. And that's kind of how the prison industrial complex was born. And I want to talk a little bit about the field squad, because I get a lot of questions about that. Can you talk about the work that you were doing?
Okay, that's another misconception about prison. Okay, you do the crime, you do the time. And we know probably like at the inception of this, a lot of it was meaningless work. A lot of it was like ball and chain, where you was busting rocks all day, or anything like that when you see in the movies. Well, that involved that meaningless work had evolved into big business. Why should the work be meaningless when we could benefit from these people who are now slaves, who are now indentured service to our society? And it's the way they're going to pay us back, by working for free. That sounds great if you're on the outside looking in and you haven't been convicted of a crime. until you're in the situation and you're trying to right your wrong, right? Hey, man, I'm here. I'm trying to grow up. I'm trying to right my wrong. I'm away from my family and I want to get back to my family, only to be put in a system that's going to beat and bash you down by making you pick cotton. Now, the correlation between my culture and cotton is not a good one. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
This is horrific times in history between Black people and the cotton field. And for me, at 17 years old, right, my second day arriving at Clemens Unit in Brazoria, Texas, to be forced to pick cotton, right, was just like, I mean, I don't know. All I can say is I completely understand what my ancestors went through, right? And to be forced into slavery, right, in modern times when the cotton gin is invented, right? Black man invented the cotton gin because they didn't want the torturous laborious of work, and to be forced to pick over 1,000 pounds of cotton a day, right? For from 95, I think they just ended that in what, 2010? You may know better than me. They just ended the manual labor of picking cotton here in like 2010 in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. I think that's absurd based on how much money this system already generates and make.
The crazy thing about that field squad is, yes, so they're not picking cotton anymore, but they are still very much working in the fields doing other field jobs. And so if it's still that culture, right?
Still
It's
that
still
culture. They picking
absolutely.
corn, they picking corn, okra. Man, they got all kind of stuff out there. Cutting grass with an Aggie. This is another thing, man. These prisons are actually forms, right? This is something that the public doesn't know. A prison unit is actually a form. There are pigs, horses, acreages. I'm talking about 2,800 acres of land that is being worked by free and indentured servants to the Justice Department.
What was so fascinating to me about working in the field squad, which was lovingly known as the Ho Squad,
The whole
and
squad.
right, was we would be out there in a line cutting grass with an Aggie, and we would watch the tractor pass by us. And I remember just thinking, this is so absurd that we're doing this when that tractor could just run over the land and do it so much quicker and more efficiently. I mean, it really was about the culture of the act. The other thing that we've just recently learned is the Texas Department of Criminal Justice is not making any money. They are losing money on the field squad. So it is quite literally, it's not even about the business aspect. It's quite literally about keeping that culture alive. Texas just does not want to let go of that culture.
They do not want to let go. So the audience or people in the audience may be saying, well, hey, you need to do something. You need to do some work. You need to be forced to do something. I totally agree. But how about force us to learn? Like, this is what I'm saying. How about force us to learn a skill set that will help society? If I've been down here cutting grass with an Aggie for 8 years and I'm released into society, it's more than likely I will be back robbing somebody. I don't know if that makes sense to the audience. Teach us
Well,
a skill set. We have time to grow and learn and develop into positive citizens. But Texas Department of Criminal Justice is wasting that time to keep the cycle of poverty and the cycle of ignorance and the cycle of incarceration going. We could have learned so many more things, right? Other than cutting grass with an Aggie. And that is my complaint. Like, you have us here. We are here to suffer. Teach us something. Force us to read books. They didn't care if I read a book. They didn't care if I learned a new word. They didn't care any of that. Only thing they cared about was torturing me in the hot, blistering sun to cut 2,800 acres of grass.
I couldn't agree more. That, and I think that it's so common for people's kind of their criminal career, and yours wasn't a career, but their criminal career to start at those young ages. And our recidivism rate is so high. Young men are going into, and young women are going into the system at 16, 17, 18 years old, getting out for a little bit, not having any new skills, not being set up for any kind of positive things in their
Right.
life. They're beat down emotionally, mentally, and physically. I mean, we've got folks dying in the Texas sun right now inside of our prison systems, and their confidence is at an all-time low. They're not getting educated. And then we're putting them out here and wondering why they're, oh, you must have liked prison. No, you didn't teach me anything different.
You didn't teach me anything. I can say this. One thing that I learned that prison taught me, or what prison helped me with, it introduced me to myself, Marci. Right. And when I say that, I'm saying I went into prison thinking I was this bad street, you know, gang member, but prison taught me I wasn't. I went into prison telling my mother that I didn't eat eggs. I got so hungry in prison to what eggs was good. Eggs tasted great. I came out of prison, man, I want some eggs. What are the eggs, right? So it introduced me to my tolerances and my weaknesses and my strength. And in learning that about myself, I decided prison wasn't for me, or the criminal lifestyle wasn't for me. Many people may say great, but a lot of people don't discover that in there while they being tortured. You know, it's no different from asking any other victim, what did they learn when they got victimized? And it's trauma that they are suffering from. It's not reform that they are suffering from. They learn not to trust. They learn not to heal. This is what is going on in prison, to the unbeknown to the public. This is a trauma-filled place that is inflicting trauma to people who ain't recovering from this trauma no time soon.
I really couldn't have said that better myself. And I have just a firm belief, and it's completely based on my experience in a women's prison, is that the ladies that I was incarcerated with, Robert, they were victims of trauma far long before they ever committed a crime that landed them in prison. They were broken way
Bro,
before they ever landed in prison. And I'm just wondering how does that compare or translate to the men's unit? How did you see the men around you? And maybe they didn't talk about trauma as much as women do. I don't know.
well, we don't talk about it. You know, it's only recent. I never heard of mental health until recently. The whole time that I was in prison, there was no mental health consultants. We had it was no mental health, nothing. You just either kept your mind or you lost your mind, right? That was it. That's where the line was drawn. There was no such thing as mental health, you know, or any of that. You know, that's a very recent conversation. In the male prison, it was all about victimizing people. It was all about the alpha male syndrome, right? And even with the guards, as you know, in 2003, they started a Safe Prison Act where they wanted to eliminate these things. And that's right when I was released, right? Of course, when I got out, they wanted to change it. You know, I didn't get none of the provisions that the Safe Prison Act brought in. But the one key thing that they ran into when enforcing these new rules to kind of help and decrease the drama was the culture of the guards. They had to get rid of the guards that had the legacy of mistreating people, right? Before they could even, for the programs they were trying to implement even worked. And this was the first time me as a black man, this is the first time that I ran into real racism. I'm talking about real racism, not the racism of affirmative action, or you know, we don't want to give you a job because you black. No, I'm saying the racism of white boys. And I say boys because these aren't men, boys that are here to deliberately break, hurt, harm, and kill black people, man. They have signed up for this job to do this. And that was my experiences, particularly on the Ferguson unit in Midway, Texas, which is still in existence today, which sits on a street that they built and they named Savage Drive.
Wow. You know, Robert, I grew up in a middle class suburban white neighborhood, kind of in a little bubble. My parents are hippies and I was raised to believe in equality. I remember even before going to kindergarten, my mom talking to me about race, gender, and I mean, just how everybody's the same, everybody's equal, we care for everybody the same. But I still grew up in this little bubble. So I never saw any kind of racism or anything like that until I got to the prison system. And my experience was through staff. People ask me a lot about racism in prison amongst the incarcerated ladies. And we, our environment in there, our community inside, we didn't really have racism as a problem. Yes, there were racist people, but those they separated and kept to themselves. But when we lined up for chow, Robert, we were all together. When we sat in the day room, we sat all together. But the racism that I witnessed came from staff.
Came
And
from
I'm
staff.
just, yes, sir, it definitely came from staff. Can we talk a little bit about the culture? I told you a little bit about how women are just not, we don't really segregate ourselves. And I'm wondering about your experience in the men's prison with that, because gangs are very prevalent in Texas male prisons and they're not
Right.
so in women's prisons. So we want to know about that.
Well, prison is, like I said, it wasn't until I went to prison that I discovered real racism. And this is the belly of the beast, right? This is what this place is called. And this is why it's called the belly of the beast. This is where all the disgusting things take place and manifest themselves and show their ugly head, right? And male prisons here in Texas were highly segregated. I mean, to the extreme. You actually experience a reverse racism when you go in prison because it's overpopulated with Black and brown inmates, right? Making the white inmates the minority in there. So in there, just in our day room alone, we did not sit together. They finally installed 2 TVs in the day room, and the 2 TVs created the division. One side was all African Americans, only African American television programs, only African American seating, all African American. The other side was Hispanics, right? Only Hispanic programming, only Hispanic seating. And when I say programming, I'm not saying TV. I'm saying programming that African American control what was watched on that TV, and Hispanics control what was watched on the other TV. The white prisoners had no TV and they had no place to sit. They could only sit on the floor. That was the treatment of racism, like a reverse racism, right, amongst the inmates that was in prison. Even in that, when I tell you my friend was killed at 17 years old, Roderick Campbell, I keep bringing him up, keep bringing life to his name, let him know his story won't die. Well, he was killed in a race riot amongst the kids of the youth offenders, where Blacks and Mexicans was our first time being around and being with each other. And it creates so much tension to where race riots will crank up and will start. And he was murdered by Hispanic men in a race riot, right? So racism is prevalent both ways when you are in prison, from the inmate side and also from the staff side. Now, that sounds pretty bad and bold. Blacks get this TV, Mexicans get this TV, and the white boys don't get anything, right? That seems cruel, but listen, that racism did not compare to the racism the Black, whites, and Mexican inmates received from the staff. It was a reflection of that, but it did not compare to the way we was treated by the staff. To say this, most of the white inmates had the better jobs. right? They probably didn't have a place to sit, but they was all maintenance workers, right? They was all maintenance workers. They was all SSIs. It was very few of them doing field work. So the racism that the staff produced trumped any racism that was mirrored by this behavior in prison.
Even as far as 2020, my last year in prison, we definitely, yes, I mean, I worked host squad. I was, so definitely white people were working the fields. And also I think that just the difference between the, yes, white people were still the minority, but probably not to the extreme as when you did your time as they are
Right.
now. Yes, I definitely believe the criminal justice system still attacks marginalized communities. I still believe that is definitely not a solved issue. So I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is it probably just wasn't as bad as it was when you were incarcerated. So white people were definitely out in the fields. But even as far as 2020, we noticed that the clerk jobs, the admin SSIs working with the warden, all of those were white women. I have a podcast. Jennifer Toon and I have talked about that several times. It's definitely still, I mean, it's like you said, it's from the administration, it's from the staff, and it's just Texas holding on to that
That
culture. Yes, sir.
that culture of oppression, you know, that culture of affliction, of treating people in a second class manner, based on race, based on, you know, them being poor, based on them. I mean, it's the lack of humanity that is present to the highest level. How do we get rid of that? How we fix that? I do not know. The only way I could say is to stay out of that as possible as you can. Teach other people to stay out of that as possible, as much as you can. But for the people that are in there, you have to remember these people are human. These people can be reformed if given the chance to be reformed. I mean, that's what me and you, if we was given the chance at true redemption and being reformed, we could be bigger than where we are now in life. We could have a great, beautiful skill set to be able to help other people and our children instead of them producing this cycle of recidivism and sending people back and wasting people time to where they have no skill set and they have nothing to do but to depend on their ignorance when they come home.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there are so many changes within our system that could be helpful to our communities, right? Because what we're doing now, we're failing each other, we're failing our communities, and it's about business, absolutely, not about humanity. Speaking of humanity, right now while we're recording, it's July 20th. Temperatures here in Texas are triple digits, and we are fighting for climate control in Texas prisons. You talked about prisons being a farm. They raise livestock. I worked as a host squad worker. I worked shoveling pig droppings in the pig domes, which have climate control. The pig domes have an exhaust system that pulls the hot air out. They have like a swamp cooler type system that lowers their living quarters by 20 degrees. And our prisons don't. 70% of our housing units still don't have any kind of climate control, and people are quite literally dying. Can you talk just a little bit about summers in the penitentiary?
Yes, I can. And when you told me you was in Austin and y'all was having a rally to you know, bring about climate changes in prison because of how hot it is. As soon as you said that, the first thing I said, Marci, I say, yeah, because in 1998, it was the hottest summer I ever seen. And in 1998, I seen people die. I seen crops die. It was one of the worst summers ever. And you immediately brought up the statistics from that. So me and you previously not having a conversation, and I'm able to identify to you from an experience from 95 to 2003. 1998 was the worst summer. It was the worst torture that I ever experienced. And in this time, there was no, right now they try to bring ice once a day and bring different things. There was no ice given to us. I mean, we really had to survive the Texas heat in prison. What do you mean by that? We really had to survive working and living inside a car with the windows rolled up. This is no exaggeration. We really had to survive working and living inside a car with the windows rolled up in the Texas heat. And many people died and they did not care. It's like, well, what's going on there? Exactly. These places was built in Ferguson unit was built in 1948. This place is not to equip to hold nobody at this point. You can't even come in and remodel it to the point that it will be fixed. They need to get rid of all those old, as we call them, red brick units, right? Because they are not safe places. These places are death traps. And that's for young people and elderly people. You will die here. These temperatures are high. The windows are knocked out. And it's just a disgusting place to be in. And to think that these people make money from these people that they store and they do not provide provisions to keep them alive. I'm not saying add leather seats to the car. I'm saying put an air conditioner in it.
Yeah, we're definitely not talking about comfort here. And you saw people lose their life in the Texas heat in summer times. I've witnessed that as well. TDCJ says that no one has died in Texas because of a heat-related death or illness since 2012. I call their bluff. I call their bluff because I was there and I watched women fall out. I watched women get taken by ambulance because of a heat-induced seizure and never come back. And I believe that it's a big cover-up and we're working. I'm a little bit passionate about it right now. And Robert, I still know too many women that are incarcerated suffering right now. So it's really even closer to my heart. So I won't just dwell on it because my people are tired of probably hearing about it. But
yeah, I understand. But I'm just trying to let your people know it's like working and living inside a car with the windows rolled up. That is an unsafe place. And if they talk about that on the news, that is what that 8 foot by 6 foot cell is. That is that. That is that. That is living in a cave with no ventilation. And as you just said, the pigs have ventilation, but the people do not. That is a humanity crisis.
it is a humanity crisis. It's a public health crisis, a healthcare crisis. And it's not about money either, guys. Texas had a $32.7 billion surplus this year. We asked for $500 million to cover AC for all of the units. It passed in the House, bipartisan passed. The House was ready. Yes, we have to stop these deaths. Yes, we have to stop these heat-related illnesses. And yes, we have to keep people wanting to work for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. And when it hit the Senate, the finance committee let it die. They didn't even respect human life or human health or work environment enough to even let it be heard in the Senate. So that's how that went. And the car analogy is spot on. Walking into your dorm from anywhere, from chow, from visitation, from wherever you're outside of your dorm, when you walk back into your dorm and that door closes behind you, it is exactly the feeling of on a hot summer day, stepping into your vehicle and closing the door behind you before that engine is fired up and that AC is on you.
Yes, it is a sauna time scene. So I'm with you guys, man. I'm with those people that are in there, and again, I'm with bringing about awareness about those different things because those things are real. And for the people that say good for them, I say, if you say that's good for them, what we are trying to tell you, it is not good for society. This is what I'm saying. It is not safe for society. It is bringing people back into society that is going to hurt you, your family, or somebody else. This is keeping crime moving forward, not backwards. This is creating trauma that the community has to embrace once these people are home. This is not good for them, and it's not good for you, and it's not good for nobody. This is what you have to understand about this treatment that is taking place. It is not good for nobody.
It's state sanctioned violence. And that's what my experience was with those ladies is they experienced violence and then they became the person inflicting violence. And
Yes.
then they go to prison and violence is inflicted on them. It's just a cycle. And so at some point we have to stop that, right? At some point we have to start talking about healing and rehabilitation and fixing the problems that started way before a crime was committed. That's for sure. Robert, so you have a lot of things going on now, and I want to talk about how you said that you had a mindset change during your incarceration and that
Right.
that was internal, not necessarily something that the state did for you. But how did you use that mindset when you got out? What was your path?
Okay, so for some of the things we didn't talk about, I was a gang member. I was a member of the Crips when I went into prison. Again, not only was I a gang member, let's remember, folks, I was a kid, right? So I was a kid. I joined the gang. It led me to prison. Now, for the kids that may be listening, I'm saying that to say, don't join a gang, right? Do not join a gang. I was a gang member. I went into prison as a Crip, right? Like I say, prison introduced me to myself. And what happened was I have a commissary slip, right? From 2000, right? And on this commissary slip that I saved from 2000, on this day, I caught assault on an officer charge and was placed in the hold, right? Pre-hearing detention first, then placed in the hold. And it was one of the lowest points in my incarcerated time, right? And when I was in the hole, I had a commissary slip. You can't make commissary from the hole, which I heard they got rid of. They got rid of the hole, Marci.
Well, they changed it up a little bit, right? So they passed some laws saying you couldn't be there for more than 15 days. Well, they stopped the 15-day punishment. But what
15.
they did is right. So what they did is you could be in pre-hearing detention and then they could let you up for one day and then put you back. So yes, they passed a law doing away with the 15-day whole punishment, but no, they still use it. They've
They
still
still
found a
use
way around it.
so
So,
that's what happened in my situation. In this situation, I got assault on an officer about trying to go to commissary. So I had a commissary slip in my pocket. And once I was placed in pre-hearing detention, which is the hold, right? I end up being there for 45 days. 30 days was pre-hearing detention. 15 days was the sentence, right? Even back then. And this was in 2000, right? And I have this commissary slip on my desk in my office at home. And on the back of this slip, I wrote a letter to myself about this experience, right? I basically talked to myself on this on this slip, like, hey, Robert, listen, you at the bottom of the bottom. They treat the pigs better than you. This world does not like you. If you're gonna reform yourself, you're gonna have to do it yourself. You're gonna have to take control of your life. And one of the ways I was able to take control of my life past that experience was through reading. Right up until that point, I hadn't read much, right? But I discovered that you can read a book and be educated. You can read a book and be entertained, right? And from reading, it changed my mindset, Marci, and also another thing for those that have people that are incarcerated. My mother coming to visit me changed my life also, right? She would come visit me in these conditions and just hug on me, right? Has she not done that? Have I not experienced compassion coming from the lady that gave me life? I think I wouldn't have lived that long. I think I would have been a very violent and repeat offender. I would either been in jail or I would either be dead, right? But reading and having free world support, right, dignified me in a manner in which that I didn't want to let the people down that was here for me at my worst. right? It kind of became an obligation of mine to honor these people who helped me when the world has left me for dead, right? So those two things were key factors in changing my mindset. Reading and getting outside help coming from my family, my mother in particular, right? Gave me the determination I needed to lift myself up by the bootstraps, as they say, right? And get my life on course. And I left Texas Department of Criminal Justice January 27th of 2003. This year, January 27th of 2023, made my 20-year mark of staying free and not being back in the belly of the beast. I am currently a business owner. I own multiple businesses. And I also, for the last 9 years, been doing a toy drive in my community, giving back as I gain the success that I gain from my community, I give back to it. And you can find more about the toy drive and the things that we do in the community at gcountyhopefoundation.org. That's gcountyhopefoundation.org. And that are things that we are doing in the community and giving back. Marci, so yeah, those were the things that I experienced. So I'm saying that to say this. If you in prison, read, reform yourself. If you know people that are in prison and have loved ones in prison, support them, send them books, visit them, help them. These things may be their awakening as it was mine.
You talked about your mom visiting you and that free world support. And I have a lot of people that write me that don't have that free world support, that they don't have loved ones on the outside that can come visit. Maybe it's financial problems, maybe it's substance abuse disorders, or sometimes their parents are incarcerated too.
Right.
And so we do try to contact a lot of those people. And that's something that we work on, because it's important. It's important for people incarcerated to know that there are people out here that care, because when you're in there, you kind of feel like everybody's forgotten about you. You
Right.
had your mom, you knew she hadn't forgotten about you. I love that you talked about educating yourself and how reading definitely can change things.
Reading saved my life. Reading saved my life. I mean, that's my message to any young person trying to figure out what they're going to do, what's going on. You know, we have social media. This interview is being held on social media to reach people. We have the TikToks, the Instagrams, and the YouTube, but all those things are distractions from reading, right? But sitting still in one place and training my thoughts and focusing my thought into reading word opened my mind up like nothing else was able to do, Marci. So that's just my message and my story, that, hey, I became the person I am today through reading, right? And I think reading is very key to helping people get focused in life. I've read more books here in the free world than I did when I was locked up. Because, you know, I've been free longer, but I'm saying that to say a lot of people that go to prison talk about how many books they read in prison, but they read no books when they're home, right? So when I say reading changed my life, literally, it changed my life in prison, and I haven't stopped reading since I started in prison.
Robert, that's such good advice. And I know that I have a lot of family members that have loved ones on the inside in our community. And I'm sure that they're hanging on to the things that you're saying, sending books into their loved ones. And I always love to hear from them when they say, hey, I told my son about, and he wrote back. And you're reaching people on that level as well. You talked about social media. That's how I found you. I'm going to make sure, and you guys, I'm going to put all of Robert CEO Hockley, which you can Google that name also, but
Right.
I'm going to put all his handles in the description of this video. You guys make sure and follow his journey, his success journey, and I'll put the information for how they can get involved with your organization and the toy drive and the things you're doing in your community.
Right. And also let them ask questions. Also let them know we're going to follow up this interview with a Q&A. So to everyone listening to this particular interview and everyone that's following Marci's channel and the things that she's doing, ask us questions. Ask me questions in particular. We're going to come back in a couple weeks or so, and I'm going to answer questions, man. I know a lot of people have questions. A lot of people like, man, I never heard that before. So be inclined to ask questions. You can follow me on social media. That's CEO _ Hockley. Hockley is spelled Hockley. And let's just share information and get the information out here, because it's up to us to change this society and to change this culture. It's not going to be TDC. It's not going to be the state. It's not going to be the country. It's going to be us, everyday people working together to help each other. So, Marci, I appreciate the interview. Is there any other questions that I can answer or anything else you need from me? I'm available. You are available. Thank you for having the courage to reach out, to help me spread my story and spread my truth. And I'm highly grateful for this.
I'm grateful for you taking the opportunity, and I'm excited to see what more people want to know, specific questions. We're both open to sharing whatever information we need to share to reach the common goal, and it's about community. We're so glad you're here. Thank you for joining us, and we'll talk to you real soon.